confessions. How should I put this delicately? And he'd end up on his back, staring at the clouds. Hi, I'm Sock Marionette, and it's time for Bargain Counter Argument After Dark. Why is it after dark? Because I'm doing the Book Confessions tag, as pioneered by Book Reviews with Becky. I even have an after hours calendar. I even have an after hours candle, because it's Bargain Counter Argument After Dark. After hours. My first confession is, it's actually not after dark. I just have really good curtains. My second big confession is, nobody tagged me for this. I'm just doing it because I want to. So, are you ready for the meat of the matter? The heart of the ocean. My book confessions. Okay, I'm not going to do that anymore because it's going to get real old real fast if it hasn't already. This is, in fact, the Book Confessions tag that was originated by Book Reviews with Becky. And she said anybody who's subscribed to her can do it. And actually, in her description, she says, I would love to hear your answers in the comments below. Booktubers tagged. We'll be excited to watch your videos. I hope so. So I just consider this is basically an open tag, as near as I can tell. So I don't think she's going to be too upset if I do it. I hope not. So yeah, I'm going to jump into it. There are 10 questions, and I will try to answer them as confessingly true, as truly confessional as I can. Yeah, that grammatically didn't really parse, did it? Okay, the first question is, what is an unpopular book opinion or preference that you have? Well, I actually, true confession, around about, I think it was 2004, 2005, I want to say, I read the first Harry Potter book. I was visiting a friend and she had to work, and so I just was hanging around her house, and she had like all of the Harry Potter books that had been published to date. So I picked up the Sorcerer's Stone or the Philosopher's Stone. I think it was Sorcerer's Stone because this was in the US. And I had heard so many good things about Harry Potter, and I started to read it, and I just really didn't care for it. I read about halfway through that first book, and it just was not for me. And so, so I just put it down and never looked back. However, even though that series was not for me personally, one thing I really like about it is that it got a whole bunch of people reading, and the success of the movies, I think, made people want to read the books, and maybe there were a bunch of people who are readers today who wouldn't be otherwise if it hadn't been published. I don't know. And it also proved to the publishers that there was a huge audience out there for these kinds of works, a lot of money to be made, a lot of a lot of kids out there who wanted to read this, and a lot of adults who wanted to read it as well. Anyway, so you have people who are now adults who grew up reading Harry Potter and who became writers themselves because of Harry Potter. Maybe they started writing fan fiction, or maybe they were just like, because the publishers were actually looking for writers, or probably a lot of writers who got published who might not have otherwise if it hadn't been for such pioneering works. And so I appreciate that, even if I didn't appreciate the books themselves. The other unpopular preference that I have, and I don't know how unpopular it is, certainly publishers seem to think it is, but I read a fair amount of historical romance, and how should I put this delicately? People would meet, court, fall in love, get married, have children, and so on, in other historical periods outside of Regency England. Places, times that were not Regency England still had romances happening. I know. Again, I think readers realize this. I think writers realize this. I'm not sure publishers do. They're just chasing that Bridgerton bag. Okay. Uh, 2. Have your reading has your reading taste, have your reading taste changed over the years? And if so, how? I would say probably not. I think after I became 11 or 12, I started reading romance, which I hadn't when I was a kid and probably wouldn't have been interested in it. Maybe I would have. I don't know. I would say it's kind of. I read more. I mean, I was reading adult books from a very early age. I think I was like 10 years old when I read The Dead Zone by Stephen King and some other stuff that I probably shouldn't have been reading at that age. Yeah. And I still read a lot of stuff, a lot of genres, and I don't think really added very much to that. The only difference is, and I was going to say it's nonfiction, except that I remember when I was a kid reading nonfiction that wasn't assigned for school and getting into it. It was, written for kids. So I think it's more, not so much that my tastes have changed, it's just the level of sophistication. I've started reading adult books, and I think when it comes to nonfiction, I read general nonfiction, and I read nonfiction for a general audience within my field. I'm, studied through graduate school. I studied history and religion, how they intersect. But I studied each separately and then how they dovetail. And I will read literary criticism, history, religion, religious history, textual analysis, film criticism, and so on, that is meant to appeal to a pretty specific graduate level audience, maybe. And I don't know. Well, I do remember reading that kind of stuff even when I was in high school. So yeah, I don't think my reading tastes have changed. I think I read more YA now than I did when I actually was YA, but there's more of it being published now because, I mean, when Harry Potter came out, I was in my late 20s, I think, when the first book was published. So that wave of YA publishing and writing that took place after I became an adult. So there's more of it to read, and I enjoy it. And I think what's written is of better quality. What's written specifically for a YA audience is of better quality. I can't imagine The Hunger Games being published as something for specifically marketed toward YA when I was YA. I think, there was stuff like that being written, but it was being written for adults and marketed to adults. So I read it anyway, but okay. Number 3. What genres do you read to get out of a book slump? I think we all would like to know. We all want tips and tricks, I think, to get out of book slumps, reading slumps. I would say when I'm in a reading slump, I don't know that I get into reading slumps as such. I think what I tend to do is I tend to kind of fixate on one type of reading and let other types of reading slide. So if I get into a book slump, it's probably because I'm reading a lot of fan fiction and that's what I'm interested in. Sometimes I am in a reading slump. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does, fan fiction is a good place for me to go because you can get something that's very hyper specifically tailored to your interests and that takes place in a world that you're already familiar with, so you don't have to do the work of trying to imagine that world or what those characters look like or how they're going to behave. You're already familiar with the characters and the premise, and so that helps. And also fan fiction comes at such a variety of lengths, anything from just a few hundred words to hundreds of thousands of words. And so yeah, I think when I want to read professionally published books, if I'm in a slump for that, I think what I'm going to gravitate toward are going to be really fast-paced thrillers or stories that are told using a lot of different media, like has transcripts. Like I just read a book called Tell Me What You Did by Carter Wilson, and that's about a podcast host. And so a fair amount of what's going on in that are transcripts of the podcast. And there are some other books like that. So sometimes it's something that reads pretty quickly and is fast-paced and has something to keep my interest. Like it switches from transcript to prose to something else and then back to transcripts, prose, letters, etc. Love that, and that will help. Let's see. Who are some of your automatic buy authors? I don't know. I know that I don't necessarily buy them automatically, but if somebody's coming out with a book, I am going to put it on hold at the library. That's Stephen King is one. And I don't auto buy Stephen King anymore because every once in a while he'll come up with something that really, really disappoints me. And actually, the only book that I was really, really disappointed in, and it was one I bought because I was auto by Stephen King, and that was Under the Dome. And I did not like that book at all. And so now I'm a little more cautious. But I always will put his books on hold at the library, and then if I like them, I'll probably like look for them at library sales or used bookstores or whatever to add them to the collection. In fact, because I buy so many books from, because I borrow so many books from the library and read them that way, a lot of times it's like, what book am I automatically going to put in a hold for? And there aren't that many. I mean, there's Stephen King, and that's pretty much it. Sorry. Yeah, because I saw that Emily Henry just released a book. It just came out yesterday because I'm recording this on April 23rd. I think it just came out yesterday. And I read the summary and I was like, maybe I'll pick it up if I see it. And I really like Emily Henry. So I don't know that there are any auto buy. I don't know. I can't think of any beyond Stephen King. Let's see. 5th question is, how many chances do you give an author before you won't buy them again? Or in my case, read them, because I get so much stuff from the library. I will give a fair number of chances because unless the book, it's just like the writing style is just not at all for me, or, for whatever reason, and it's not necessarily that it's poorly written or anything like that, it's just not a style that I can get into. I'll usually if I don't like a book, but I do like the writing style, I'll be like, oh, okay, well, this is like this particular theme or this particular plot wasn't for me, but I will probably give that writer another chance. And I don't know how many times I will let Lucy pull the football away and I will keep kicking at it. That's a Peanuts reference. Lucy Van Pelt would hold the football out and Charlie Brown would run to it, getting ready to kick it, and then she'd pull it back at the last minute and he'd end up on his back staring at the clouds. Yeah, it's American football, not the other kind. So yeah, I mean, I'm not going to give them infinite chances, but I'm very rarely do I just say, oh, this is not the writer for me ever again. Let's see. Do you have anything you like to do or listen to while you read? I mostly, when I'm reading, I like to read. I find music distracting, and I find, you go into the waiting room at the tire store, at the doctor, whatever, and there's always a TV playing, and I just want to read my book, and I can't when Judge Mathis is yapping in the room. Don't like it. Do not want. So yeah, and I also don't do things while I read because I tend to read. I do the eyeball reading. I don't really listen to audiobooks very much. When I listen to stuff that isn't, music, podcasts mostly, and when I do that, I tend to do that while I'm hiking around in the woods, but I kind of prefer podcasts over books for that. I don't know why. It's just something about the rhythm of people doing podcasts, talking versus reading, that just works better for me. And sometimes when I'm listening to podcasts, I'll be playing solitaire, but that's a different issue. I'm trying to read the questions off my computer, and it's over there, and you'd think that would make it easier because I'm nearsighted, but I'm farsighted and nearsighted. I'm older, and I usually use reading glasses. Let's see. How far do you read before DNFing? Okay, well, if I start off and right away I know that I am not going to like that book, that I don't like the writing style or whatever, I will DNF it right away. If it starts off promisingly enough and I start to get disenchanted with the book as I go, I'll usually give it at least 10 to 20% before I DNF. My problem is that once I get to the 50% plus mark, I kind of want to find out what happens next. So maybe I'll look up spoilers. Let's see. Do you ever find yourself making the same faces as the characters in the book? Yeah, sometimes. I know when a character rolls their eyes, I will roll their eyes. I read one book where in the space of 6 pages, she rolled her eyes 3 times and was planning to roll her eyes later. So that's like basically 4 eye rolls in the space of about 8 or 9 pages. And then after that, the book kind of settled down a little bit. But yeah, the eye rolls. I'll roll my eyes with the characters, and sometimes I'll roll my eyes at the characters. I think that's pretty common. And sometimes it'll say like, he made a grimace of effort. And I'll be like, what would that be like? And then I'll do it myself just so I can, yeah. I think it's a useful tag. Useful tag. I think that is a useful tool for me as I'm reading. Kind of get myself into the head of the characters and what they're experiencing, what they're seeing. Let's see. Rereading. Yes, no, or depends. Yeah, generally speaking, I like to reread. I'm actually in the middle of an epic reread right now of Wool, Shift, and Dust by Hugh Howey. And sometimes I've been reading books for live streams and for BookTube. For my live stream, I have Book Talk with Sock, which is my Monday live stream. It's at 7 p.m. Eastern, Mondays, every other Monday. The next one's going to be on a Tuesday, though. Okay, that was a pretty disorganized plug for that. But one of the things I've been doing lately, I'm not going to be doing it for the next time, but is getting into discussing books you might read as an entry point for getting into a new genre or recommending to a friend who wants to get into a new genre. And so for some of those, I've been rereading old favorites, like for mysteries and science fiction and fantasy are the ones we've done so far, paranormal romance. And I've been rereading stuff just to make sure, especially if I haven't read it in a while, just to make sure I feel good about recommending it, or do I think it fits the brief? And when I do that, I'm always like, oh, I'm just going to read a little bit and just kind of skim through it and determine whether or not I think it's a good fit for what I'm recommending it for. And then I just like sit down and read the whole thing. And that's what happened with Wool. I read the whole thing and now I want to read the others. And yeah. I keep waving this fan around and I was forgetting that I actually had it for a reason. And the final question, book confessions, is actually not a question. It is to tag other booktubers. So I am going to tag anybody who's watching this and wants to do it. Do it. Anybody who's watching this and doesn't want to do it, don't do it. I feel weird about tagging people because, I mean, yeah, you can ignore it if I tag you, of course. But I don't want to put any pressure on anyone. I don't know. Because sometimes people tag me on Instagram and I always feel like, can I do this? Or is it okay if I don't do this? I don't know. So, book confessions. Thank you for your attention and I hope you have a good night or day.